The 2024 NFL Draft has come and gone. We now have a much better look into where all of these prospects went, their draft classes for each team, and how that kind of shapes out their roster. So today we are going to be looking at every draft haul for each team and grading it. Definitely going to be interesting to see. And when it comes to draft grading, obviously it is one of those situations where you don't know how good a player is going to be. It's all projection, but this is just going to be grading how I perceive the draft haul for each team, how I think they did filling their needs, getting good value. So ultimately, just my opinion. Obviously, they have every opportunity to prove me right or wrong, but we are going to be diving in here, starting with the Arizona Cardinals. I think at pick 4, obviously Marvin Harrison Jr. was the right choice. I had him as the number 1 player in the draft class. I think he's just uber talented, such a good fit for what the Cardinals needed as well. So I think he's going to be a dominant number 1 wide receiver for a long time for this franchise. Darius Robinson was a bit of a reach for me. I didn't think that he was worth a first-round pick. I know the league certainly viewed him that way. There was a lot of rumors that he was going to go first round, and ultimately he did. I just think he's a little bit raw. I don't think he has a ton of pass rush moves, but I do see the potential in him. He's just not where I would have gone with that choice. Max Melton in the second round, he's a nice athletic, versatile corner, and that was kind of the theme of this draft, getting Elijah Jones in the third round. You also got Dadrian Taylor Demerson in the fourth round, Jaden Davis in the seventh round. Taylor Demerson, good center fielder. Those other cornerbacks, they just provide some versatility, some athleticism. I definitely like getting better in that area. It was a major weakness for the Cardinals. I think Isaiah Adams, Tip Ryman were a little bit of reaches for me out of Illinois in the third round. Both of them, I think, could turn into decent players, just not where I personally valued them. But for me, my favorite pick for them was Trey Benson at pick 66. He was my running back 1 in this draft class. I love his contact balance, his athleticism, his power. I definitely think that he can be their number 1 running back for a while. And I think that in the third round, that was an excellent selection. For the Cardinals, this was a big draft class, definitely added a lot of depth and talent to their roster. I do think that overall it was a pretty good draft for them. I'm going to give them a solid B. Definitely some things I would have done differently, but I do think that they added a lot of talent to a roster that desperately needed it. Next up, we have the Atlanta Falcons, by far probably the most surprising and craziest draft of the entire weekend. At pick 8, they selected Michael Penix Jr. out of Washington. I somewhat understand taking a swing on a quarterback. I think that it is a bold decision when you bring Kirk Cousins in, you're seemingly in win now mode, and you go out and draft a quarterback of the future. I don't mind Michael Penix as a player. Top 10 for me is really high for him, but he's also, he's a 24-year-old prospect. He's going to be 26 by the time that it makes any financial sense to move on from Kirk Cousins. I don't really think that this helps them now. I do think that Penix could be a decent player for them. I really don't see the vision of this on a short-term scale. And for a team that is kind of putting a lot of money into Kirk Cousins and into this current window, I really don't understand the logic of it. But as crazy as that pick was for me, I think trading up for Rook Orororo at the beginning of the third round just made no sense to me either. I didn't value him near that kind of pick. I really didn't even have him as a second-round player personally. I was lower on him than most, but I do think that was a really bad pick, giving up draft assets that you definitely could have used for this roster in drafting a player that I think he has athletic traits, but he's really undeveloped. He's just not somebody I would have taken in the second round. They did salvage it somewhat by their next 2 picks. Braylon Trice, I think, will be a really solid number 2 edge rusher for them. I don't think he's ever going to be a number 1 edge rusher throwing up big numbers, but he had some good pressure numbers. I think he's got great effort. He's decent against the run as well. So I think Trice was a nice pick in the third round. And then Dorless kind of reminds me a lot of a really poor man's Grady Jarrett. So I think learning from Grady Jarrett on this roster, I think that could be a really nice fit, and he could turn into a nice player for them. J.D. Bertrand was a fine pick out of Notre Dame. The last 3 guys were kind of uninspiring picks for me as well. So overall, Braylon Trice, Brandon Dorless kind of saved this somewhat, but overall, this was a D draft. I just did not really like what the Falcons decided to do with this draft, and I don't think that's a very unpopular opinion by any means. Next up, the Baltimore Ravens. They did pretty much what the Ravens always do, drafting good players with good value. Nate Wiggins at pick 30, I thought was good value. It did surprise me a little bit that they took him just because he's not the most physical tackler. He's willing, but he's really thin. He needs to add weight, and in the AFC North, that is something that, they tend to really value tackling, physicality, but nonetheless, he's a great cover corner and I think a good value at the end of round 1. Rosengarten is an uber athletic offensive tackle. He played right tackle at Washington. I think that he needs to add weight. His athleticism is really good, but it comes at the expense of a true lack of power, and I think he may get overwhelmed with power in the NFL, so it wasn't my favorite selection. I do think that they had some other really good picks, though. Adisa Isaac out of Penn State. He's kind of that prototypical Ravens rusher. Good athletic traits, good IQ. Maybe doesn't have the most developed pass rush arsenal, but I think that with good coaching, he could turn into a really nice edge 2 for them. Devontae Walker, he's going to be a wide receiver 3, stretch the field, deep threat for them. He's probably not going to put up consistent numbers, but I do expect him to have lots of explosive plays. He did struggle with drops, and I think that's a big reason he was available in the 4th round. But if you can get that under control, get a little bit more consistency in his game, definitely going to be a worthwhile selection for them. Then potentially one of my favorite picks of the whole draft, TJ Tampa out of Iowa State. Whether you're playing him at corner or potentially safety, I do think that he can be a really nice player. He's long. I think he's relatively fluid. He's pretty athletic as well, so I do like what they did selecting TJ Tampa in the 4th round. You get a couple other guys, Rasheen Ali, Devin Leary. Leary kind of more of a backup quarterback type. Don't think he'll be anything more than that. Ali showed some really nice flashes at Marshall. Hasn't always been super consistent with it, but worth a swing in the 5th round. Overall, I think the Ravens did what they always do, got good value, good players, especially in the middle of this draft. Isaac, Walker, and Tampa, I think, were all great values. So, going to be an A-. I think Rosengarten drags that down a little bit. He was a little overdrafted for me, but overall, really good draft for the Ravens. Next up, the Buffalo Bills. I think this draft was really interesting. They traded out of the 1st round, ended up with the 1st pick in the 2nd round, and took Keon Coleman. I do think they are going to ask him to step into that X role, take over a lot of Stephon Diggs' production, which I think is a huge ask for a player that I do think struggled to separate at times at Florida State. He wasn't very quick, especially at the combine. So I do think that there is a lot of boomer bust potential with Keon Coleman, but I don't mind the pick by any means at pick 33. Cole Bishop at 60 was early for me, not where I would have gone. I think adding safety was a decent pick, but I do think that Bishop maybe a little bit overdrafted there. I did like Dwayne Carter in the 3rd round. He was really good in 2022. Had a little bit of a less impressive season in 2023, but he has good IQ. He's a good leader. I do think he could be a nice part of a D-line rotation for them. Ray Davis in round 4, one of my favorite stories of the draft. That being said, he is a 24, 25-year-old running back. Probably not going to be a long-term player for you. You probably are having him for your rookie contract and then letting him walk. Cedric Van Pran Granger, I was really low on, but this was pretty equivalent to the value that I thought he should have gone. I do think that, this was a good pick for them. It's not a steal like a lot of other people are saying in my eyes, but I do think that it was a worthwhile pick. I do think he can be a nice player for them and potentially even getting starting reps at some points as well. Olafosio out of Washington, a nice swing on some upside. Solomon is an underrated, undersized rusher. I think in the 5th round, that was a really nice swing. Daquan Hardy, another decent pick as well in the 6th. So I think they got a lot of depth pieces. I think they got some guys that can contribute, but I just don't know that they got any pure stars or really any picks that I'm just super excited about. So I'm going to go with a C+ here. I think they got some nice players, but just not necessarily how I would have navigated this draft for them. Next up, we have the Carolina Panthers. They traded back into the 1st round and got Xavier Legette. He's that yak, big-bodied, deep threat with speed that they can really use in this offense. I don't mind going up and getting him at all. He is a bit of an outlier, late breakout age, but I do think that his ability to go up and get the ball in contested catch situations, to run away from defenders on screens, things like that, I do think he could be a really nice option for the Saints team. And I also like getting Jonathan Brooks in the second round. You go get your running back. He's not necessarily who I would have taken. He was my running back 3. I liked Trey Benson more than him, and Jalen Wright as well. But I do think that he has a lot of talent. He's still super young, coming off an injury. We'll see if that slows him down at all, but that running back room was not great for the Panthers, and Brooks definitely adds a lot more talent to it. Trevin Wallace is a complete boomer bust player. He's super athletic, but he really has no clue what's going on the football field. I do think that they're going to have to be very patient with him. Otherwise, he's going to flame out pretty quickly. So I get the swing. It's earlier than I would have taken him for sure. Jatavian Sanders was great value in the 4th round. I know that he didn't run quite as fast as a lot of people thought he would. There was potentially some character reasons for his drop. I don't have a lot of information on that, but that was kind of hinted throughout the draft. But I think Sanders could be a nice player for them. He's a good yak weapon. I think he's a really nice route runner. So if everything checks out for him, I think in the 4th round, that was a great selection. Charles Smith-Wade, Jaden Cremedy, and then Michael Barrett. Barrett's actually somebody I could definitely see sticking on this roster, and I think he's even more pro-ready than Trevin Wallace. He doesn't have a lick of athleticism, but I think if you ask them both to go play right now, I think Michael Barrett might be better in the NFL. So both of those guys are interesting for them to add to that linebacker room. Overall, this Panthers draft I thought was good, not great. I did give them a solid B. I think that there were some high-risk plays here for the Panthers, but a lot of players that I do like, and I think they ultimately did improve their offense around Bryce Young. Next up, a very small draft class for the Chicago Bears. Obviously, at pick 1, getting Caleb Williams. I think he has the potential to be that franchise quarterback for a team that really has never had one. I do think that was the right pick, and ultimately, it's hard to mess up the first pick, but they didn't do it. I think they picked the right player for their franchise. And then getting Rome Odunze at number 9 was awesome. He provides an answer both in the short and the long term. He'll step in as a wide receiver 3 from day 1, and I think be really, really good in that role, and then take over once Keenan Allen moves on as well as that wide receiver 2, maybe even wide receiver 1, depending on how quickly he is able to develop and if his game translates well to the NFL. Just surrounding Caleb Williams with a ton of weapons, that 3-headed monster at wide receiver. I love that decision from the Chicago Bears. And then I really like Kieran Amagaji at pick 75 as well. I think he has guard and tackle versatility. I thought he dominated his competition at Yale. He's a local Chicago kid as well. So I really like a ton of that. He needs to work on his technique, and there is going to be a competition jump coming from Yale, but I think that's well worth the swing in the 3rd round. The pick that they made that I really don't like is Torrey Taylor in the 4th. I get it. He's a great punter prospect. We saw a lot of it when Iowa was playing football on Saturdays because their offense was dreadful. But taking a punter in the 4th round, when you have a lot of other places that I think you can address on this roster, I just think that it's just a bit of a luxury pick that I don't think the Bears have necessarily earned at this point. But I did like trading back into this draft to go get Austin Booker. It was expensive, cost them a 4th next year, but I think Booker really just didn't have a ton of reps at Kansas. I was a little surprised that he came out this year, but I think if you can get the most out of him, continue to develop his game, he could be a steal in the 5th round. So Bears get an A grade for me. I really liked what they did. If they didn't draft a punter in the 4th round, this might be an A+ draft for me. But overall, great decisions from the Chicago Bears and Ryan Pace from their front office. Next up, we have the Cincinnati Bengals. This is definitely a more aggressive draft than the Bengals have tended to have in recent years. Marius Mims at pick 18. He's a little bit of an inexperienced prospect, to say the least. Only started 8 games at Georgia, but the talent is undeniable. I definitely think that he fits really well with Cincinnati once as well. Sitting behind Trent Brown and Orlando Brown, it's a great situation for him to learn, for him to develop those traits. He doesn't have to start right away. He'll be the long-term right tackle for Cincinnati, but also provides insurance if either one of the offensive tackles go down, which has been a problem for the Bengals in the playoffs in past years. Getting Chris Jenkins in round 2, I did really like. He's a run-stuffing defensive tackle with some athleticism. Definitely fits the culture as well. Definitely like that pick. Jermaine Burton is a complete wild card. Obviously, there's the character concerns, the maturity concerns, but when he is playing and he's focused, his game is really, really impressive. He's very explosive. He's a true deep threat. He's a nice yak weapon. I think he can separate at all three levels of the field. I think this has a potential to be a great steal in this draft, or he could flame out due to his character concerns. Definitely could go either way, but I don't mind the swing at all. McKinley Jackson in the end of the third round, I thought was a pretty awful selection. He's a pure nose tackle, and I don't think looked particularly great at Texas A&M. I definitely had a day 3 grade on him, and obviously it was one of the last picks of day 2, but I don't think that was the right selection for the Bengals at pick 97. They got a pair of tight ends in Eric All and Tanner McLachlan. I definitely think at least those guys can contribute early on. The Bengals tight end room is pretty wide open, so they can definitely compete and be decent players even as early as year 1. Josh Newton is somebody that provides some versatility. Cedric Johnson, a high upside athlete. I would be a little surprised if he is even on the team necessarily, but who knows. And then Matt Lee, I do think, was a really nice swing in round 7. I genuinely think he can definitely make the team and might even be their long-term option at center. I think that was an absolute steal in round 7. Overall, I give the Bengals a B+. I do think that McKinley Jackson did hurt their draft grade, taking him on day 2. But overall, it's a little bit of a high-risk, high-reward type draft for the Bengals. I love a lot of the upside of what this draft could be for them, though. The Cleveland Browns up next obviously didn't have a first-round selection. In round 2, they took Mike Hall Jr. out of Ohio State. Definitely somebody with a ton of pass rush upside. He's a high upside pick, but I do think he can get washed out in the run games at times. They have a ton of bodies at the defensive tackle spot now. So I think Michael Hall will be definitely a good rotational pass rusher, and I definitely think he can provide some juice on the interior of that defense. I think it was a fine pick, maybe a little earlier than I would have taken him. Zach Zinter, coming off a major injury, I did already have kind of a 4th round grade on him before that, so a little earlier than I would have taken him. I think he could potentially be a guard, for them long term, but I don't know, wasn't my favorite selection. Thrash provides some juice. Nathaniel Watson was kind of whatever. Miles Harden and Jawan Briggs I do think were nice late swings in the 7th round. Harden especially somebody that I could see being a nice player for them, though that corner room is really loaded. Briggs provides some just kind of explosiveness and juice as well on the interior. Overall, I think they've got contributors, nobody that I expect to be a true star for them. Obviously hard to do that when you don't have a first-round pick, but overall, just going to give the Browns a C. I think they did fine with this draft, but nothing that really excites me too much for them. The Dallas Cowboys up next. They selected Tyler Guyton with the 29th overall pick. I was terrified of Guyton, really. I wouldn't have wanted to touch him in round 1. If I could have picked one spot for him to go and be successful, it was probably the Cowboys. So I'm not surprised that they ended up taking him. I definitely think he has the potential to be a good player, but there was a lot of technique issues for, I thought, where Guyton should have been at this point, kind of through his development track. Marshawn Kneeland, I thought, was a little bit of a one-trick pony. He just kind of wins with speed to power. I thought that a lot of the hype on him as a top 50 player was just a lot for me. So not somebody that I really thought that was a great value for. Speaking of great value, though, Cooper Beebe in the 3rd round. Think he'll be a starting caliber guard for them. I definitely think that he's going to be a consistently really good player and somebody that we all just kind of looked at and said, why the heck did he go in the 3rd round? I had a 2nd round grade on him, kind of an early 2nd round grade. So that was a great pick. The rest of the picks here, Kalen Carson, Leo Fau, Ryan Florney, I think those were fine. Justin Rogers was kind of whatever as well. The one I did want to point out is Nathan Thomas out of Louisiana. He played tackle in college. I think moving into guard, he could be a really nice player. And like I said, offensive line talent develops really well in Dallas. I wouldn't be at all surprised if Nathan Thomas makes this roster and maybe is even competing for a starting guard spot at some point in the near future as well. So I do think that there were some nice picks here. I think Guyton and Kneeland could turn into decent players, but overall, this class also, I'm just given a C. I think there's a lot of boomer bust potential in this class, and guys that I am worried might not ever turn into really good players for this team. The Broncos draft was definitely an interesting one. At pick 12, they took Bo Nix out of Oregon. I do think that of all the places Nix could have gone as far as coaching and scheme fit, I think the Broncos is probably the best situation possible. I don't think he was worth a top 12 pick. I had a true second round grade on him. I don't think that he is going to be a guy that can lead you to a Super Bowl. Do I think he can be a fine starting caliber quarterback? Sure. And I get that, there really wasn't a lot of options at quarterback. The Broncos needed to have somebody other than Zach Wilson and the other guys that are currently in their quarterback room to be on this roster next year, but it just seems like they kind of panicked and took Bo Nix. I'm not surprised. I am sure that they were targeting Bo Nix anyway. It's just, when all of those quarterbacks went off the board, they felt like they had to go get him, and I don't think he's ever going to be a star quarterback in this league. If you told me he was the 15th to 20th best quarterback in the NFL, I could absolutely see that. But I don't know that he's a very high upside selection. I did like Jonah Ellis in the third round. I think that he is really undersized. This is a little bit closer to where I had him. I think this is actually good value for him, but I thought a lot of the true second round hype was a little bit much for me, but in the third round, I really liked this pick. He's got a great bag of pass rush moves. He's just undersized, so he's going to have to use those moves really effectively at the NFL level. And then I like pairing Bo Nix with Troy Franklin. Franklin did drop. He's a slender player. I think he's a deep threat, but he's shown chemistry already with Bo Nix. Getting him in that room, I do think was really important for this team. And then I actually really liked a lot of their picks down the board. Chris Abrams-Drain in the fifth was a great selection. I think he can be a really nice player for them. Audric Estime in the fifth round I thought was great value as well. I know he ran really slow at the combine, but I thought he cleaned that up at the pro day. He looks fast on film. He's really tough to tackle. He's super young. I think he could be their lead running back at some point. Deshaun Vele, I thought, showed some decent things at Utah as well. So really, besides this Bo Nix pick at the top, I actually really liked what the Broncos did, but the whole draft will be judged on the success of Bo Nix and what he provides to this franchise. That pick was really, really bad in my eyes. So overall, the Broncos get a C+. I like a lot of what they did, but Nix is going to have to turn into a star quarterback for them to justify taking him in the top 12. I'm just not confident he can do that. The Detroit Lions up next. They ended up trading up to go get Terrion Arnold. I was a little bit lower on Arnold, but I thought this was a lot closer to where he should have gone. He fits their culture really well. I think that was a solid pick. There was a couple of other corners that I liked personally better than Arnold, but for what the Lions wanted, I'm not at all surprised that that's where they went. I also like getting Rakestraw in the second round. You double dip to that corner room. That was probably their biggest weakness of their entire team. So go ahead, go add guys in that room that fit your culture, fit your play style. Rakestraw was dealing with some injuries, but I do think that he is a nice player in round 2. Then things get kind of interesting. You go ahead and trade up and go get Giovanni Manu out of British Columbia. He is a true developmental type project. Obviously not somebody that played against other college players. He was playing, in college in British Columbia. So definitely just going to be a transition and an interesting player to watch for them. They clearly loved him. It's just, we'll see how that turns out. They also traded up to go get Sion Vaki out of Utah. They announced him as a running back. He played both running back and safety. Got a lot of guys in that running back room. I don't know. I didn't love that pick, but I thought it was fine. I was super low on Mekhi Wingo, but I still think that this was a pretty good value selection. I like I said, was low on him, but not this low. And then Mahogany, reportedly was doing with injuries. He's a complete steal. If he can stay healthy in the 6th round, I definitely think he could even potentially be a starting guard for this team. So overall, there were some things that I liked, some big risks that they took. They gave up a decent bit of draft capital next year to go up and get some of these true developmental type projects. So I'm going to go with a B for the Lions. I think that a lot of those mid-round picks carry a lot of risk, but I like what they did, kind of especially in day 3. And then, at the top of the draft, I thought they got good players as well. The Packers up next, and the Packers are always a team that just is very bizarre. Jordan Morgan, for me, at pick 25 was early. I was just low on him. I thought he was pretty much relegated to be a guard. I didn't love his foot speed for how athletic he was. The Packers are a lot like the Cowboys, where most offensive linemen that go there are much better than you would expect. And I think Morgan could be a really nice player. I think he could be a really good guard and a fine tackle. So pick 25, I don't have a major problem with that. He was just somebody I've been consistently lower on than consensus. Edgerrin Cooper, I projected the Packers to take him in the first round. They ended up getting him in the second round. Not at all surprised. He fits their prototype to a T for what they want in a linebacker. Replacing Devondre Campbell makes a ton of sense. Javon Bullard, I thought, was a good pick as well in the end of the second round, towards the end of the second round. I definitely think he provides some versatility on the back end of that defense. Marshawn Lloyd, I thought, was fine. He can definitely provide some explosiveness to pair along with Josh Jacobs. I do think he has some fumbling issues. He didn't survive contact as well as I would have hoped for somebody his size at USC, but I think around that spot is where I would feel comfortable taking him, so no major issues there. I do think that Hopper, Williams, Monk, Oladapo, all of them were just whatever picks for the most part. I thought Hopper and Williams especially were super overdrafted, so did not love the middle of this Packers draft. But I loved getting Michael Pratt in the 7th round. I definitely think he's a high floor backup. I think he'll probably be one of the best backup quarterbacks in the NFL and could potentially net them some value if he develops nicely. Maybe some team sees the development of him in the preseason. You're able to see a lot of good things out of him and could potentially flip him for a future pick that's better than this. So I don't mind at all taking Pratt in the 7th round. Kalen King, what a fall from grace. I thought he was borderline undraftable. I don't have a problem taking a swing on him in the 7th round based on his junior tape, but he did not look good last year, to say the least. Overall, for the Packers, I wasn't the highest on Morgan and some of their middle round picks, so they get a C+. The Packers tend to have some kind of out there drafts, and I think there were some picks, especially in the middle rounds, that were pretty out there for the Packers, but overall, this class wasn't bad. I'm going to give them a C+. The Houston Texans up next. These were a lot of guys that I actually was higher on than a lot of people. Kamari Lassiter, I know that he ran so slow at his pro day, but I love his instincts. I love his ball skills. I love his coverage ability. If he is not just complete liability due to his speed, I think he is going to be a really nice player for them. I think that, there is risk, obviously, in taking a non-athletic corner. There have been instances in which it's worked. He is just going to be an outlier if he's successful, though. Blake Fisher at 59, I was really high on Blake Fisher. I thought, there was nothing wrong with taking him kind of at this point. I do think that he could potentially be the right tackle of the future for this team. Kalen Bullock provides some range. He cannot tackle, but he is a rangy player. Cade Stover, I think, is a solid tight end for them. He's never going to be a superstar by any means, but I think he'll be super reliable. And then the rest of the draft, I thought, was just fine. I don't think they added a ton of stars, but I did think they can add some contributors that can, be decent players early on and be good players for them throughout what they hope to be is a potential Super Bowl window. So overall, going to give the Texans a B. A lot of guys, Lassiter, Fisher, that I was a little bit higher on, maybe Stover as well. So I don't mind a lot of this draft. I just think that there's not a whole lot of upside. I think most likely you're getting a corner 2, a decent right tackle, a tight end 2. That's just not super high-end talent for a team that, might be looking to add a little bit more than what they got. But overall, pretty solid draft for the Texans. The Indianapolis Colts up next. They ended up getting Latu, pick 15. As long as the medicals check out, I think he is a great player and a great pick. Was a top 10 player for me based on just pure talent. So really, really like getting him in the building. Then you go get A.D. Mitchell. Once again, this was a little bit of a riskier pick just due to his attitude, his character concerns. This was a lot closer to where I actually had Mitchell ranked, but I still see the upside, the athleticism, the talent is undoubtedly there. And then you get some decent interior offensive linemen. Don't mind those picks at all. And then down the board, Anthony Gould, slot receiver, Jalen Simpson, I thought was a decent pick for them as well. I think that they were all fine, kind of down the board in day 3. You get some guys that fill out the depth of the roster. Nobody that sticks out to me as super exciting difference makers, but Latu, Mitchell, Bordolini, I think all could be really nice players for them. Goncalves as well, I think could be a nice piece for them. Overall, going to give the Colts a B+. I thought they did a pretty good job with the options presented to them. Getting A.D. Mitchell in the second round provides definitely a lot of upside to this draft. Latu as well, assuming that kind of all of the non-football related things with those guys checks out. Next, the Jacksonville Jaguars, and this was a draft that I thought started off really strongly, trading down and still getting Brian Thomas Jr. I think that adds a true vertical threat to the offense that they really needed. I really liked that decision in the first round. Now, round 2, I hated the Mason Smith selection. I was so low on Mason Smith. I had like a round 5 or 6 grade on him. I understand that the athletic tools are there. I understand the length, the size, the athleticism, it's there. But he has no clue what he's doing on the football field. I thought that he just did not look like a player that was going to be a major difference maker. This is just a huge upside swing, and I really can't get behind it. I thought it was one of the worst values of the entire draft at pick 48, so that really hurt them. Thought Jerry Jones, Javon Foster were fine selections. Jordan Jefferson I thought was early for a true nose tackle run stuffer. I didn't love that pick. Miles Cole was an intriguing 7th round sprinkle. He's got insane length, size. Definitely think he could potentially turn into a player for them. But overall for the Jaguars, going to give him a C-. Just the Mason Smith selection, completely terrible in my eyes. I think that they lost some value middle of the draft as well. So I liked the start. I think Brian Thomas is a good player. I'm not quite sure that they did a good job not passing on a lot of talent. Quinyon Mitchell they could have taken early in round 1 before the trade back. I thought corner was a huge need for them. You could have taken A.D. Mitchell in round 2, something like that. So I don't know. Just not really what I would have done if I was the Jaguars after that first round. The Chiefs up next. They ended up trading up with the Bills to go get Xavier Worthy. Now, I will say I have been super low on Xavier Worthy, and I do think that this was a reach. That being said, I think his speed is going to be utilized extremely effectively in Kansas City. If there was one team that, I was scared would use Xavier Worthy the right way as a Bengals fan, it was the Chiefs. And, I do think he's going to be a difference maker for them. I don't think he's Tyreek Hill by any stretch of the imagination, but I do like him. In Kansas City, I think that was a good pick. Sua Matea, I hope he doesn't have to start year 1 for his sake. I think he's an incredibly raw prospect, but I was really high on him, actually. I do think he has loads of talent, so that was a good value selection for sure. Jared Wiley, I can definitely see why they liked him. Jaden Hicks, Hunter Norzad, I thought were good picks in rounds 4 and 5. Kamal Hadden has some nice potential in round 6 as well. So I really, really liked a lot of the picks down the board for them. I think the first 2 picks are incredibly risky. Worthy, somebody I was super low on, but I think could be utilized well in this scheme. Sua Matea, I think if you throw him out there, week 1 of year 1, he's going to struggle massively. So development will be important. I'm going to give the Chiefs a B. I like what they did, but I think there is a lot of risk in what they did as well. The Raiders up next. They ended up staying pat at pick 13, didn't panic and take a quarterback, and ultimately got Brock Bowers out of Georgia. He was a top 6 player for me. I love the talent. It is a little bit of a weird fit with Michael Mayer going there last year, but I think he's too good to pass up. Bowers is more of kind of that H-back type player anyway, the slot receiver. Mayer's a little bit more of an inline player, so I can see how they could work together. They're just going to have to get creative with those 2 tight end sets. Jackson Powers-Johnson I thought was a great value as well at pick 44. Definitely too good to pass up. Delmar Glaze was a bit early for me, but I understand taking the swing. Richardson, I think, was definitely worth a swing with the traits he has. Definitely got size, speed combination. He needs to work on his coverage ability, but beginning of, day 3, I have no problem with that. Tommy Eichenberg, I think, could honestly step in and be a day 1 starter for them at linebacker. I think he's got really good IQ, instincts. He's somebody that I do think was a really good value pick. Dylan Lobby as well. I really like him. He's a nice Danny Woodhead, third down back type of player. He's honestly more dangerous as a receiver than he is as a runner, but I think he could be a nice complement to Zamir White next year. Overall, I did really like the Raiders draft. I do think going into next year with Aiden O'Connell likely as your starter is probably not what they had in mind. I do wonder if Michael Penix or one of those guys were guys that they were potentially targeting at pick 13, but I do think you added a lot of talent in this draft. Going to go with a B+ for this Raiders team. And, ultimately, taking best player available is not ever something that I'm going to be too mad about for a team. The LA Chargers up next. I think they surprised a lot of Chargers fans by going with Joe Alt. It didn't surprise me at all. If, I projected them to stay at pick 5, I ultimately had them trading with the Vikings, but had they stayed at pick 5, I would have projected Joe Alt to go there. It doesn't surprise me at all with Jim Harbaugh being their coach, and I have no problem with that. Not taking Neighbors or, Rome Odunze sucks because of how bad that wide receiver room is, but getting Joe Alt, you can't really complain about either. McConkey, I was fine with. I've been a little lower on McConkey. I don't think he's ever going to be like a number 1 alpha receiver by any means, but I do think he is going to be very productive in this offense because there's just not a lot of other guys for Justin Herbert to throw to, and I could definitely see McConkey being that Roman Wilson in the Jim Harbaugh-led offense. Junior Colson was always going to be a Charger. He was the quarterback of the defense. It makes way too much sense for him to go back and reunite with Harbaugh. And then, I did think they went off the rails a little bit with their next 2 picks, but I loved getting Cam Hart in round 5. I think he's a nice physical long corner that has some good upside. And then Kamani Vidal. He's kind of that bowling ball. Reminds me a lot of Blake Corum type of player where, he's just low to the ground. He is effective in short areas. He is effective just because he has the natural leverage. So I can definitely see him being a nice little bowling ball type running back for them. And then Brendan Rice and Cornelius Johnson, I like taking the swing on both those guys. I was a little bit lower on Rice, but not that low. So I think that was definitely worth a swing. And Johnson definitely has some juice. Again, not surprising that he went with another Michigan-type player there. So overall, really like the Chargers draft. Going to give them an A-. I do think that they are missing out still on a great wide receiver, but overall, they filled a lot of holes, and I did think get a lot of immediate contributors and other guys that I think could be nice players for them in the future. The Rams up next. They took Jared Verse in the first round. I really liked that pick. I do think that was good value for them at a position of need. They ended up trading up and going and get Braden Fisk. I thought they gave up a ton to go get him. He was a player I liked, but giving up that much was an interesting decision for them. I do think that it was just a bit rich to go get a player that, I don't think is ever going to be a true game wrecker, but I do like Fisk. Blake Corum in the 3rd round, I definitely think that makes sense. He is likely going to be a Kyren Williams replacement, so they don't have to pay Williams. They have very, very similar types of roles and different styles, so I wouldn't be at all surprised if he becomes the running back 1 sooner rather than later. Cam Kinchens I thought was fine. Brennan Jackson was a nice little swing on some athleticism. Tyler Davis was a super undersized nose tackle, but I thought he was really effective against the run. I honestly think that, he could be a really nice player for them. The Rams have just churned out undersized interior defensive linemen and had so much success with it, so I do think that Tyler Davis went to a good situation for his development. And then 2 guys that I really love them taking the swing on. Bo Limmer, I thought was definitely worth a 4th round selection. So getting him in round 6 was awesome, especially in this offense. I think that makes a ton of sense. And then KT Leviston as well out of Kansas State in the 7th round. That was awesome value. So, really overall the Rams had a nice draft. Giving up the picks to go get Fisk hurts, but B+ overall for the Rams. I do think that they got a lot of immediate contributors and players that could be a core for this team in the future. Looking at the Miami Dolphins now, Chop Robinson was their pick in the 1st round. I definitely think there's risk to it. I understand why they made that selection, but I do think that they could have gone in some other ways. He has high upside. His athleticism is really nice, but I just think I would have gone in a different direction. Patrick Paul, also somebody that I was just a little bit lower on. He's long, super athletic, but he has a lot of technical flaws. He's a bit of an older prospect. So the first 2 picks I actually wasn't super huge on. Jalen Wright in the 4th round I thought was a certified steal. I do think that Devon Achane and him will potentially be a really nice 1-2 combination. It sucks for Jalen Wright in the sense that he's going to have to share carries, but I also think that Wright is going to be one of the most explosive backs, potentially in the NFL. A-Chain might be as well, so it might not be great for fantasy purposes, but for defending against this team, I think that combination is going to be deadly. Muhammad Kamara, he has like T-Rex dinosaur arms, but he was a really fun, productive rusher. I definitely think that he has some potential to be a nice player for them. And then Malik Washington and Taj Washington, I like both of them. They're a little bit undersized type of players, but I definitely think they could separate, be good slot type receivers for them, and continuing to add weapons for Tua. I'm not too mad about that. So overall, going to give the Dolphins a B. The first two picks, I don't mind. They're just risky picks, and then I really like what they did down the board. So I think, overall, this could be a really good draft for the Dolphins, especially if Robinson and Paul do hit. The Minnesota Vikings up next. Obviously, the story of the Vikings is getting J.J. McCarthy at pick 10. They traded up one pick rather than having to give up a ton of assets to go get him. And look, I haven't been the biggest fan of J.J. McCarthy. I had a late day 1, early day 2 grade on him. I understand that quarterbacks are going to go high, and pick 10 is a lot better for me than pick 5 or so. And I think that ultimately McCarthy in the Kevin O'Connell offense is probably going to be pretty good. I thought that, there was Caleb Williams. I think Drake May is my quarterback 2. And then my QB3 was probably whoever the Vikings drafted. And so I do think McCarthy has a really good situation. He has great receivers. He has a really good head coach that can scheme things up for him. So honestly, I trust them to get the most out of McCarthy. And in this situation, I would expect him to be a pretty good NFL quarterback. Then trading up to get Dallas Turner, I definitely get the appeal of Turner. He was a nice value. They gave up a lot of picks to go get those 2 top guys, and that's ultimately what this class is going to be completely judged on. But I don't mind the process at all of going up, getting players that you just love. I also like Kyrie Jackson in the 4th round. He's that physical press man corner that Brian Flores, is always looking for. So I don't mind that at all. And then I thought Michael Jurgens was a nice pick for them in the 7th round. Overall, like I said, the top 2 picks are going to make or break this draft, but I actually do expect them to be pretty successful in this Brian Flores scheme and this Kevin O'Connell scheme. I just really believe in the coaching of the Vikings right now, so I'm going to give this a B+. I do think that they did pretty well for themselves, and I think this could be a really nice draft for them. The New England Patriots up next. They got my quarterback 2 in Drake May, and ultimately I think that was a steal. Now, May is going to be in a situation where he does not have a lot of help on the offensive side of the ball, and if he starts early on, I'm really hoping for his development that Brissett starts, because I do think there is some technique that he needs to clean up, and the supporting cast around him is still pretty abysmal, but he was my quarterback too, so I love them not overthinking it, turning down all of the trade offers that they got for this pick and just selecting who I think will ultimately be a franchise quarterback for them. They got Jalen Polk in the 2nd round. I thought that was a little bit early for him. I was high on him, but that was a little bit high for me for where they took him, with especially some of the other wide receivers available. Caden Wallace and Layden Robinson, I just didn't understand. Both of those offensive line picks I thought were way overdrafted. So, the middle of this draft, kind of after Drake May, wasn't great, though I did love Javon Baker. I thought he was a nice vertical threat, somebody that could be a really nice steal for this team. And then I also liked taking the swing on both Joe Milton and Jaheim Bell. Milton, most likely he's going to bust and be a terrible player, but the traits are intriguing, and in the 6th round, I definitely get taking the swing. Jaheim Bell was a really, he was the summer scouting legend for many years because he was so versatile. He was a really interesting tight end prospect. I'm surprised he dropped to the 7th round. I thought he was a lot better than that, so I do think that that was a really nice find for them on day 3, but overall, I'm going to give the Patriots a B+. I think you walk away with your franchise quarterback, some decent wide receiver contributors, and maybe some high upside guys. The offensive line picks I'm still pretty questionable on, but getting your franchise quarterback, that's going to raise your grade pretty high in this draft, so going to give the Patriots a B+ for this. The New Orleans Saints up next, and I've typically not liked the Saints drafts. I haven't agreed with a lot of their draft strategy, but this year was much different. Talise Fuago at pick 14, I really like. Ryan Ramczyk, probably not going to be a long-term player for you, maybe even a player for you anymore at all. So I think Fuago could be the long-term right tackle. I also think that if for whatever reason him at right tackle doesn't work out, I think he can be an all-pro caliber guard. His nastiness in the run game is so much fun to watch. And then I love getting Kool-Aid McKinstry in the 2nd round. I thought press man corner, as long as you don't ask him to, do the stuff that he is not as good at, which is run with receivers downfield, be a little bit more instinctive in zone coverage. If you let him just bump and run and be physical with guys, I definitely think that he can be awesome and a great value for them in the second round. They didn't have any round 3 or 4 picks, but getting Spencer Rattler in the 5th, I mean, I think that this was potentially a steal. Somebody that is a really high upside backup for now, and you might have a potential starter on your hands. If you go with Derek Carr for the next 2 years or whatever, Spencer Rattler might be able to ultimately be the guy that allows you to move off of Derek Carr and his terrible contract and his mediocrity and go with somebody with a little bit more upside. So I don't mind that pick at all. In fact, I really like it. Bub Means was fine in the 5th round. Jalen Ford and Christian Boyd I really liked in round 5 and 6. Had no problems with those there. Boyd was a decent nose tackle prospect for them. And then Josiah Ezram went to school with him, so definitely rooting for him as a developmental tackle. So definitely think that, this was a really good draft for the Saints. Going to give them an A- overall. And, Fuaga, McKinstry, Rattler, Boyd, Ford, all those guys I thought were really, really nice picks for them. So really good draft for the Saints that, is pretty rare for me to say. The New York Giants up next. They get Malik Neighbors at pick 6. I think that was the right pick. If you didn't love, J.J. McCarthy or the other quarterbacks, Bo Nix, Michael Penix, you take Malik Neighbors. I think he was a top 5 or 6 player in this draft, so definitely makes sense to go get him. I think he's going to be a great receiver for them if they can find somebody to throw him the ball. But Newman, I think, has good instincts. He's just really not a good athlete, and I am not sure if he is going to be able to be quite as rangy and such a good player, on the ball, creating turnovers with his limited athleticism in the NFL. Andrew Phillips, I think, could be a decent slot corner for them. I think he's got some versatility, but, 3rd round, don't mind it. Theo Johnson, I've always just been a little bit lower on. I know that he had crazy athleticism testing. I can see the straight line athlete, but I just don't think he's great at moving, side to side, short areas. I don't love it. In the 4th round, I don't have any problem with it, but I didn't think that was any kind of steal or anything. Tyrone Tracy, an interesting former wide receiver, turned running back. I think he could provide a little bit of juice there. Overall, Neighbors is the only one I feel confident is going to be a really big contributor for them. So, going to give them a B-. I don't have any issues with the Giants draft. I'm just not sure that it produced a lot of stars for them. The New York Jets up next got Olu Fashanu at pick 11 out of Penn State. Good pass protector. I do think that there are some concerns about his physicality in the run game, his pure power profile. But at pick 11, I don't have any major issue with it. I do think that it fills an immediate need for them as well. You do have starters at offensive tackle at both spots, but they're both old, injury-prone, inconsistent type, guys that you just don't know what you're going to be able to get from them on a weekly basis. So Fashanu makes a ton of sense. Malachi Corley in the 3rd round, he's an awesome yak weapon. I still think that you're lacking a true, number 2 wide receiver. I think Corley is more of a wide receiver 3 type that you have a couple of design touches for. He reminds me a little bit of Laviska Shenault, where you want to get him the ball because he's dynamic with the ball in his hands. I'm just not sure that he's a true wide receiver weapon other than on screens, short patterns, things like that. Braylon Allen, I have always been super low on. I don't mind the pick. He's physical. Trying to tackle Braylon Allen after getting beat up by Breece Hall is going to be brutal for defenses. I think Allen just lacked a lot of side-to-side athleticism, short area quickness, vision. I was a little bit lower on Allen. I think last year he didn't look quite right. Jordan Travis in the 5th round, fine. I don't have a problem with it, but coming off a major injury, I think he's just going to be a backup type. Isaiah Davis, I really don't get that selection because you already have a lot of running backs on this roster. Quantez Stigers, I think, is a very interesting player from the CFL. Definitely be interested to follow his career and how he turns out, but do think there will be an adjustment for him. Overall, for the Jets, I didn't mind this draft. I just didn't think that it was, super, special by any means. Going to give them a B-. I just think that Corley, Allen, they'll be decent players. I just don't think they'll be stars. Fashanu, I think, could be a nice player for them, but I'm just not sure that, it was a home run draft from the Jets. I think it was perfectly fine. B- is what I would go with for them. Now, if we do want to talk about home run drafts, the Eagles up next, I think you could absolutely say it was. Quinyon Mitchell, a top 10 player for me at pick 22. Awesome selection. He ended up being my corner 2, so I loved him. The thing is my corner 1 was Cooper DeJean, who they got at pick 40. Now, I understand he might be a safety, he might be more of a nickel corner, but if we're going just based on pure talent out of guys that, I watched that played in the secondary, I really, really liked Cooper DeJean. These were my top 2 secondary players, regardless of what you classify DeJean as, safety, nickel corner, whatever. These were my top 2 secondary pieces, and a secondary that I thought was getting really old for the Eagles. They were losing, some real talent based on Slay and Bradbury getting up there in age. Replenishing it with these 2 guys was amazing value. Jalix Hunt, I thought was a nice small school edge. Definitely has some athleticism and juice to turn into a nice player. Will Shipley definitely has some athleticism as well. He's kind of that pass-catching, more third down type back. He needs to clean up the fumbles, but I do like Shipley. Anaya Smith, I definitely think decent player in the 5th round. Jeremiah Trotter Jr., awesome story, being drafted by his dad's team in the 5th round. Trevor Keegan, Johnny Wilson, Dylan McMahon. I genuinely really liked pretty much every single pick that the Eagles had, and I'm giving it an A+ draft. This was the best draft of the weekends, in my opinion. Such good value at major positions of need. I really, really like what the Eagles did, and Howie Roseman continues to just draft really, really well. So, Eagles draft I loved. Moving on to another draft that I thought was fantastic. Once again, as a Bengals fan, it pains me to say a little bit, but I think the Steelers killed it. They got super physical up front. Troy Fontenot, as long as his knee checks out, which I do think was a little bit of a concern, I think he could be a really good player. I think he's going to be best at tackle. I know that a lot of people want to move him into guard because it looks like he doesn't play with great length, but he has long arms. He is super athletic in space, so I definitely think that he'll be a nice player for them. Zach Frazier, I think, was an awesome selection where they got him. He's that mean, physical, wrestler background type of player that is going to be a great bully ball type player in the AFC North. Roman Wilson, I thought, was a fine pick. I didn't love that one. That one was okay for me. He definitely provides kind of that vertical slot type of threat, and I definitely think could be a decent weapon for him, but didn't really solve their wide receiver problems to me. Peyton Wilson, injury concerns, definitely the key as to why he dropped, but I wasn't the highest on him. I still thought he played a little undisciplined at times, but he's constantly around the ball. He is flying around, making plays. If he can stay healthy, he'll be a good player for them. Mason McCormick, didn't think he showed the athleticism that he tested with at South Dakota State, but still, really good physical athlete. Definitely like him. So, really, the Steelers did very, very well in this draft. I'm going to give them a solid A. Thought they really kind of killed this draft. The AFC North definitely knows how to draft right now, and the Steelers are no exception to that. The San Francisco 49ers up next. This one was kind of an odd draft to me. Ricky Pearsall was somebody I thought I was really high on, but apparently the 49ers were even higher. I had an early second round grade on him, but taking him at pick 31 isn't a huge deal. It's just interesting that, I do think it was a little surprising for a lot of people. I am curious if this means that they are trading Ayuk. If so, I would have wanted them to get a pick this year, but we'll see how that turns out. Renardo Green was a fine pick in the second round. I don't mind that. Dominic Pooney, I definitely think, could turn into a starting caliber guard. Malik Mustafa, I think he's a rangy, nice player. Isaac Guerrero, he is a perfect scheme fit. Kyle Shanahan always takes middle of the draft running backs every single year. Guerrero is one that just has the explosiveness, the athleticism, the one-cut ability that I could definitely see him being just like some random 1,000-yard rusher that in 3 years we look back and say, who the heck was this dude? Why is he now rushing for 1,000 yards? I could definitely see that. Jacob Cowing, I think, is a decent player as well. Don't mind the other last 2 picks. I think the 49ers did fine. I have hated a lot of the 49ers drafts in the past as well, but this one I think was a solid B-. I don't think the Ricky Pearsall pick was outrageous by any means. I think they got decent value down the board, just nothing that, really popped out to me. I think they've got contributors, just nobody that's going to be a true star for them. The Seahawks up next. Didn't mind their draft. Got Byron Murphy. I thought that was a really nice pick. Confident he can be a 3-down lineman. I think he can 2-gap in the run game. I think he can penetrate. He's got a nice pass rush arsenal. So really like that. Christian Haynes, a lot of people thought was a crazy good value. That's very similar to where I had him graded. So I have no problem with the pick. I was just lower on him. And, I think he was picked closer to where I thought he should be there. Tyrese Knight, I thought was a little overdrafted. A.J. Barner's a pure blocking tight end 2. 4th round's a little early for that. I don't mind taking Pritchett or DJ James. Both Auburn corners, I think have some upside. Lamea, I didn't love his tape, but, I thought the Seahawks did pretty decent here. I gave them a solid B. Byron Murphy, Christian Haynes, I think can be good players. I think DJ James, honestly, I really liked him. I think he could stick to this roster. Barner will be a nice tight end too. So, I think it was a solid draft. Maybe no major contributors behind Byron Murphy, but I think they did all right for sure. That brings us to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Graham Barton, I definitely was just lower on than a lot of the draft community. I didn't mind him, but I do think he's going to be best at center, which is ultimately where I think he'll play. And I do think he'll be pretty good in this Buccaneers scheme. So I don't have a major problem with this pick. I just, I didn't think it was any crazy good value or anything. I thought it was a fine pick. Chris Braswell, I thought was decent. He definitely has that speed to power combination that could be deadly. I think at pick 57, that was a pretty good pick. Tyke Smith, I think he definitely has shades of Antoine Winfield Jr., so, I could definitely see that turning into a nice player for them. Jalen McMillan is that power slot, vertical slot type of player, good athleticism. He will absolutely stand in there and get murdered over the middle, but he needs to stay healthy. He needs to be consistent with the drop issues as well. Bucky Irving just has, negative athleticism. I was super low on Bucky Irving. I get it. He forced a lot of missed tackles, but I'm just not sure he's ever... He would have to be an outlier. He'd have to be Kyron Williams and, one of those guys that is just really good at making people miss and has great vision, which I don't think Bucky Irving had great vision in order for them to be really good. So overall, I thought the Buccaneers draft was okay. I gave it a C+. Nothing that really stood out to me as super amazing. Barton, I think, will be a solid player for them. Tyke Smith, I think, will be a solid player. The other guys I thought were decent picks as well. So C+ for the Buccaneers. That brings us to the Tennessee Titans, and I'm definitely going to be lower on the Titans draft than perhaps a lot of people, but just in general, I wasn't the highest on J.C. Latham. I thought taking him 7th overall was a big stretch. That was a big reach for me. He was offensive tackle 6. Only 1 had gone off the board at that point. He was just not worth a top 10 pick to me. T'Vondre Sweat, I think, is a massive risk. At pick 38, obviously, he's talented. The DUI, the weight concerns, that's definitely a risk. And, he could turn out to be a really nice player. I just think pick 38 was a bit early for all of the risks that come with drafting a player like that. I thought Cedric Gray and Jarvis Brownlee were decent players. Jalen Harrell was a nice 7th round swing. I didn't love this draft. I'm giving them a C-. I just don't love the first 2 picks. They're both high upside players for sure, and they could turn into really nice picks. There's just major risks associated with them. So that's why the Titans got a C- for me. And then the Washington Commanders. This one is a very tough draft for me to grade because I think they had some of my favorite picks here, but I just didn't love some of their decisions. So got to start with Jaden Daniels. To me, I do think they are going to regret taking Jaden Daniels 2nd overall. I have always been on the Drake May train. I at one point had him as QB1 and ultimately backed away from that, but he finished as player number 3 on my board. Jaden Daniels was outside of the top 10. I have concerns about Jaden Daniels' arm strength, his ability to, manage pressure. He's great when it comes to scrambling, but he creates a lot of pressure for himself. He doesn't throw over the middle of the field. Don't get me wrong, he's got talent. He's an incredible athlete. He's got a great slot fade. He can play with great touch. There are definitely pieces to his game that I like. 2nd overall over Drake May, that's not what I would have done for sure. Now that being said, Jerzon Newton, I thought was an absolute steal. I think that was a certified steal. As long as the medicals check out, amazing pick. Even though I do think there are some guys in front of him that, may not allow him to be the game wrecker that I think he can be. Mikey Sainristil, I do think can be a really good nickel, so I don't mind that pick at all. Ben Sinnott was my tight end too. Maybe a little bit early, but I understand, if he can turn into a nice tight end, will be well worth that pick. And, there just wasn't a lot of great tight end prospects in this draft. Brandon Coleman, I thought was a little overdrafted. I don't hate the pick, but I thought his footwork was still kind of a mess for a older sixth-year player. That's not ideal. Luke McCaffrey, I think, was way overdrafted as well as a third-round pick. That was a lot for me. Jordan McGee, I thought, was a great swing. And Javonte Jean-Baptiste, I really liked in the 7th round as well. So a very up-and-down draft for the Commanders. Ultimately, it's going to be judged based on Jaden Daniels. And, I think Newton will be good. I think some of the guys they got, especially in round 2, will be really good. I'm going to give it a B-, though. I do think they made the wrong decision with their quarterback. I think Brandon Coleman and Luke McCaffrey were overdrafted. That is tough. And ultimately, I think Newton, Sainristil, Sinnott, I think those will be good players. But I'm not confident that they made the right selection with the most important position when they had the number 2 overall pick. So that's going to be why I gave them a B-. Let me know what you think, especially about the Commanders there, but about your favorite team. How do you think I graded their draft? We are going to be looking into the 2025 way too early NFL mock draft here next, so going to be doing that, NFL team previews. Even though draft season is over, still a ton of content coming your way. Please, if you like this kind of video, hit that subscribe button down below. While you're down there, hit the like button as well. Just a free and easy way to support the channel. Truly means the world to me. So thank you so much for watching. I will catch you in the next one.